Why did no one see her for what she really was? The recruits laughed, their boots grinding into the dirt, their voices cutting sharp as blades. "Mortar girl," they sneered, like the words themselves carried weight enough to make her crumble. But's hands didn't falter. Both palms pressed against the cold steel of the mortar tube, fingertips steady, as if the weapon itself demanded more respect than the people behind her. She didn't look up, not once, because she had learned long ago that sometimes silence was sharper than any retort. The midday sun burned overhead, the packed earth of Camp Iron Vale shimmering as if it had been hammered into bronze. Sweat trickled under collars, dust clung to faces, but stayed locked in her focus. She adjusted the bipod legs, shifted the angle a fraction, her breath slow, measured. Another pebble skipped into the pit where she crouched. A small sound, but it wasn't the stone that mattered. It was the laughter that followed, brittle, eager, hungry to see her break. "Careful, don't chip a nail, sweetheart." More voices piled on, mocking in chorus. But she didn't break. She leaned forward, aligning her body with the steel, treating it not as scrap iron but as if it were alive, something that demanded attention and patience. Around her, the others shuffled restlessly. Some were bored, others entertained. But one man wasn't laughing. From the edge of the training ground, Major Rowan stood, arms folded across his chest, his frame casting a long shadow across the sand. To the recruits, his silence meant indifference. Two, it meant scrutiny, and behind his narrowed eyes, something deeper stirred recognition. He had seen hundreds of young soldiers falter when mocked. He had watched bravado collapse when stripped bare by ridicule. But this one, no, moved differently. She carried herself with a calm that wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't the posture of a trainee pretending to be tough. It was the stillness of someone who had already been tested in fire. Still, the recruits saw nothing, but a woman hunched over a steel tube. His gaze tightened. He watched the rhythm of her breathing, steady as a metronome, too steady. He recognized it instantly, discipline born not of lectures but of survival. The misfire came suddenly. A dull thump, a shock of dirt bursting too close from a nearby crew's mistake. Smoke curled into the air, acrid, choking. Recruits stumbled back, some coughing, some cursing, others laughing nervously to mask their own fear. But didn't flinch. Her hand steadied her mortar, a subtle shift to re-anchor the base plate. She adjusted by instinct, not by thought. Her jaw stayed locked, her eyes narrowed to the horizon. No panic, no hesitation, just the small, exact correction of someone who had done this before in a place far away from training fields. Caught it, the difference between instinct and fear. The field grew quiet again, but not with relief, with unease. Because calm didn't fit, not here, not now. Boots scraped the dirt. Someone muttered, "Pathetic. She thinks lining up a tube makes her a soldier." The insult carried only until moved. His boots struck the ground like hammers as he stepped forward. The laughter thinned. The smirks vanished. He didn't speak at first, only fixed his eyes on her, the way a hawk studies a flicker of movement in tall grass. Rose slowly, dust clinging to her uniform. She brushed her sleeve, her gaze meeting his for a single heartbeat. Recognition. Or was it defiance? Then her eyes dropped again. That's when he saw it. The faint glint beneath her jacket, a flash that caught the sun just right. Not a button, not a rank pin, something heavier, etched. His chest tightened. He knew metals. He knew the way they sat, the way they shone. But this wasn't any commendation handed out at ceremonies. He stepped closer, his voice cutting the air like steel. "Stop, remove your jacket." The recruits fell into silence. Curiosity clawed at their faces. Froze, not long, but long enough. Her fingers hovered at her uniform seam. The hesitation was slight, but unmistakable, and's gut twisted because hesitation meant truth. At last, she peeled the fabric back, inch by inch. And there it was. The sunlight struck a metal that should not have existed. Not bronze, not silver, something darker. Its edges were carved with symbols almost no one on that field could recognize, except him. The laughter drained away. The recruits stared, their eyes darting between the metal and the major. searching for a reaction. His jaw tightened. His heart lurched, though his face betrayed nothing. He knew enough to understand what he shouldn't be seeing. Because that symbol belonged to something erased. Adjusted the mortar again, as if nothing had changed. As if the metal on her chest carried no weight at all. The silence pressed down, thick as smoke, and then a siren split the air. Shrill, urgent, not the cadence of a drill. The recruits flinched, their bodies twisting toward the horizon where a black column of smoke unfurled, climbing into the sky. The sound rattled bones, not practice, not routine. Real. The instructors barked orders, but their voices clashed, overlapping, failing to knit order out of panic. Boots hammered into the dirt, recruits stumbling, scattering. Didn't scatter. She stood straight, her chest rising and falling once slowly. Her eyes swept the chaos, the rising fire at the storage sheds, the recruits breaking into confusion. And something inside her shifted. Her jaw locked, her voice tore through the noise, sharp and commanding. Form on me, keep the line tight. We hold this ground or the flames will take it. Her words cut like steel, and recruits obeyed. Not because they knew why, not because they trusted her, but because in the absence of command, her tone left no room for doubt. Froze, watching. She moved with precision, her steps measured, her gestures exact. She grabbed sandbags, hauled them into place, barked orders like she had done it 100 times before. And though the fire grew louder, though explosions cracked inside the sheds, recruits found themselves moving in rhythm with her. For a moment considered stopping her, pulling her back, reasserting his authority, but then he couldn't. Because the camp wasn't falling apart anymore. It was holding, because of her. And yet, the image of that metal seared into his mind. The Phantom Legion. A name never spoken aloud, a unit erased from records, a ghost. And if wore its mark, then nothing at Camp Iron Vale was as simple as it seemed. The siren still screamed, the fire clawed higher, but all could feel was the collision of two truths, the blaze threatening to consume his camp, and the darker blaze he had just seen glinting on her chest. And as recruits followed her voice through smoke and fear, realized that the greatest danger wasn't the fire. It was her. How did she command them so easily? The yard was breaking apart, smoke twisting into the sky, flames devouring wood and steel. The storage sheds cracked under the heat, their walls splintering. Ammunition crates hissed as the fire licked closer, each one a ticking fuse. The recruits scattered at first, instincts pulling them toward escape, but's voice lashed through the smoke like a whip. Sandbags, now, build the wall or the fire owns this camp. There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt, only the sharp cadence of someone who had given orders before, in places where hesitation meant death. And they moved. Hands clawed at dirt, dragging heavy sacks into place. Sweat poured, eyes stung from the acrid smoke, but her words carried a weight that pressed them forward when panic should have broken them apart. Bent low, hauling a sandbag herself, her body strained, muscles burning, but she didn't slow. Dust smeared her face, sweat soaking her collar. Still, she kept moving, her eyes never leaving the line of fire racing toward them. Push through the haze, his voice bellowing. Fall back, this zone is compromised. But they weren't listening. Not to him. To her. He froze for a moment, his chest rising hard with breath, as he watched the recruits move in sync under her command. Fear had drained from their faces, replaced by urgency. A strange order taking shape where there had only been chaos minutes before. Another explosion cracked from the collapsing shed, fragments spinning across the dirt. Shielded her face, then spun back to the recruits. Stay low, heads down, keep moving. They followed instantly. His throat tightened. He wanted to drag her out, remind her she was just a recruit. But the truth was undeniable. Without her, the field would have been lost already. She grabbed a flare, snapped it to life, and hurled it into the dirt ahead of the recruits. Red smoke bloomed, thick and curling. That's our shield. Stay behind it, build higher. The crimson haze drifted, cloaking them from the worst of the heat. The recruits coughed, their lungs burning, but the wall of sandbags rose faster now. Their hands bled, but their pace didn't falter. Major stepped closer, his boots sinking into churned dirt. "What the hell are you doing?" Her reply was sharp, steady. "Saving your camp." Their eyes locked through the curtain of smoke. His jaw clenched. He saw no fear in her, only a fierce determination sharpened by something deeper than training. Something lived. The fire roared louder, collapsing another wall. The blast of heat struck them like a wave, didn't hesitate. "Shift left, don't let it spread." She moved before they could falter, dragging recruits with her into the haze, stamping down embers, overturning barrels, rolling sandbags into burning grass. Her body ached, her throat raw from shouting, but she didn't slow. Because she had learned long ago, once fire breathes, you don't reason with it. You fight until it dies, or you do. Followed, slower, torn. Every instinct told him to reassert control, to drag her back into line. But the truth screamed louder. The camp was holding because of her. Another shed cracked open with a thunderous blast. The shockwave dropped recruits to the dirt. Staggered but stayed upright, shielding a boy half her size behind her body. Ash streaked her face, but her voice didn't waver. "Hold the line. This wall doesn't break." The recruits rose with her, dragging bags, hauling water, stomping flames until sparks hissed out under their boots. One by one, their panic hardened into something else. A rhythm, a trust they hadn't chosen but couldn't deny. His heart hammered. He had never seen anything like it, not in a recruit yard, not under his command. And again that memory seared through his mind. The metal hidden under her jacket, a forbidden emblem, a ghost. Phantom Legion. He wanted to deny it, to tell himself he hadn't seen what he thought he had. But her movements, her instincts, the way she bent chaos into order, it all screamed of something more than training. Smoke billowed, crimson flares painting the field like blood. Moved through it all like she had lived here before, like she had walked through fire in another life. And maybe she had. The last explosion ripped the air apart, louder than thunder, hurling debris across the ground. Recruits hit the dirt, choking in the haze. Stayed on her feet, swaying slightly, her shoulders heaving, her eyes burning. Saw it then, not panic, not recklessness, but something heavier. A weight she carried in silence, one she hadn't chosen to share. The fire still clawed at the camp. The siren still screamed. But already a different blaze had been lit. Not in the sheds. In the recruits. They no longer looked at her as the mortar girl. They looked at her as the center of gravity. And knew, with a sinking weight in his chest, that once this fire was extinguished, nothing at Camp Iron Vale would ever be the same again. Why didn't she argue when he called her into his office? The fire was dying. Hoses hissed, water soaking blackened ground. Smoke thinned to pale wisps, drifting over a camp that no longer sounded like training drills, but like a battlefield that had almost been lost. Recruits leaned on one another, ash streaked across faces, their hands raw from sandbags and shovels. But they weren't looking at the fire anymore. They were looking at her. Stood at the front of the line, her shoulders squared, her face marked with soot. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence around her carried weight. Soldiers who had once laughed at her now watched with quiet reverence, as if searching her face for the steadiness they themselves had borrowed in the chaos. The name, Mortar Girl, no longer passed their lips. Instead, whispers threaded the air, low, uncertain. "She saved us." Stepped forward, boots heavy in the dirt, his jaw locked tight. He stopped a single pace from her, close enough to see the ash clinging to her lashes. "In my office, now." The recruits shifted, exchanging glances. Some expected her to argue, but didn't flinch. She gave one last instruction to the nearest boy: check the wall. Make sure no gaps remain, before she followed across the charred ground. The camp seemed to shrink as they left. The weight of every stair trailed after them, like a current pulling at her back. Inside the command post, the air was cooler, filtered, silent. Shut the door with a snap, and the quiet that followed was heavier than any explosion. Stood rigid, hands at her sides, her uniform still streaked with soot but her posture unyielding. He circled her slowly. "You're going to explain," he said. His voice was quiet but iron. "Right now." Her face didn't change. "Explain what, sir?" He stopped in front of her, eyes burning. "Don't play dumb with me. You gave commands out there like a field officer. You handled that fire like a combat operation. And then there's this." His finger jabbed at her chest, where the metal had glinted. "I saw it. That insignia doesn't exist." Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "You're mistaken." His temper snapped. "Don't insult me. I've served long enough to recognize what I saw. That symbol belonged to a unit that was erased years ago." The name tore from his mouth like a curse. Phantom Legion. The words hung in the room, heavy, forbidden. Didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was confirmation enough. Stepped closer, his voice dropping into a growl. "Who are you? And how the hell did you end up here, hiding in plain sight?" For a long moment, she didn't move. Her stillness stretched the air so thin it almost cracked. Then, slowly, she lifted her chin. "I didn't come here to lead," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried steel. "I came here to disappear." The words hit him harder than the fire had. To disappear. Stared, his breath sharp in his chest. Soldiers didn't vanish into the ranks by accident, especially not ones carrying medals that had been buried with classified files. Her eyes held his not with defiance but with something heavier. Tired, hardened, but unbroken. At last, stepped back, exhaling hard through his teeth. "This isn't over," he said. "Not by a long shot. You may think you can hide in the ranks, but after today, everyone saw what you're capable of, and I'm not the only one who recognized it." Outside, the camp buzzed with recovery, engines growling, hoses dragged, voices hushed. But inside that office, the air vibrated with unspoken truth. Stood unmoving, her posture perfect, her silence impenetrable. But knew the fire outside had only been the first. The real blaze was standing in front of him, quiet, composed, and more dangerous than the flames that had threatened to burn Camp Iron Vale to the ground. Why did the camp feel different the next morning? The flames were gone, but the ground still smoked. Charred beams lay twisted across the yard, blackened skeletons of the sheds they had failed to save. The air carried the acrid tang of scorched paint, the sting of ash. Recruits moved in small groups, shoveling debris, hammering stakes, muttering as they worked. But their voices weren't about repairs. They were about her. The girl once mocked as Mortar Girl. Now they whispered her name like it meant something new, some with awe, others with unease, all of them watching her differently. She sat on her bunk in the barracks, uniform scrubbed clean but still faintly stained at the cuffs. Her hands clasped between her knees, her posture as rigid as ever. She could feel their eyes even without looking up. Every stolen glance carried questions, not insults this time, not mockery, but expectation. They were waiting for her to act again. And she hated that. Because expectation was a chain, heavier than ridicule had ever been. The door creaked open. His boots struck the floor, hard, final. Conversations died in an instant. He swept the room with one glance, then fixed his gaze on her. Outside. She rose without hesitation. The recruits parted to let her through, their silence sharp as blades. The parade ground stretched quiet under a pale sky. Ash swirled on the breeze, ghosts of the fire refusing to leave. Jaw clenched as he turned to her. "Already filed a report," he said flatly. "He claims he saw the insignia. I shut him down, but it won't hold. Someone higher up will come sniffing." His face didn't flicker. "Then let them." Snapped. "That's not an option. You don't understand. Phantom Legion isn't just a name. It was erased for a reason. If they believe one of its ghosts is walking around my camp, they'll tear this place apart to prove it." Her voice stayed calm, even as her hands curled into fists at her sides. "So, what's your plan, Major? Hide me. Hand me over." His silence was answer enough. The tension hung like smoke, Voices carried from the yard, recruits jogging past, saluting, but their eyes drifted to her, always to her. One of them muttered low but clear enough for her to hear. Legion. The word spread like sparks in dry grass. By dusk, assembled the recruits in the blackened yard. His speech was steady, commanding. He outlined repairs, discipline, order. But as he spoke, eyes kept sliding toward her. Every pause seemed to pull their attention in her direction, as though they were waiting for her to speak instead. When he dismissed them, 2 younger soldiers lingered. One stepped forward, voice respectful. Back there, how did you know what to do? Nobody else could have commanded like that. She met his gaze evenly. You don't need to know how. You only need to remember that you stood your ground. The boy nodded quickly, almost reverently, before hurrying away. And just like that, the story grew taller. That night, the officers gathered in the strategy tent. Maps of the camp lay spread across the table, but the fire wasn't their focus. It was her. She took charge, one captain said. The recruits followed her, not us. That isn't normal. Leaned forward, his face grim. I saw it, the insignia, I know what I saw. His jaw tightened, but before he could speak, another officer cut in. Then, what is she doing here, disguised as a recruit? Either she's lying to all of us, or someone higher up planted her without telling command. The argument swelled. Suspicion circled like vultures. Slammed his palm against the table. Enough, she saved your camp. Without her, you'd be digging graves. Whatever she was, she's here now. Until I get orders otherwise, she's under my command. Understood. The tent fell into uneasy silence. No one spoke further, but their eyes carried doubt that couldn't be silenced by his words. Outside sat on a bench, listening to the muffled arguments through the canvas. Every fragment she caught tightened her shoulders. Legion medal, ghost unit, classified. The past she had tried to bury was clawing its way back into the open. The tent flap snapped open. Stepped out, his face drawn, his eyes sharp. He froze when he saw her. For a moment, the air between them vibrated with unspoken tension. Then his voice cracked the silence. It's you. His hand trembled as he pointed to her chest. That insignia, Phantom Legion, there's no mistake. They said you were wiped out, every last one, and yet. Appeared behind him in an instant. That's enough. But didn't stop. His voice rose, rough, almost desperate. I saw that emblem years ago. In a briefing I wasn't supposed to attend. They said the unit was gone, erased. And now you're standing here, alive. You're proof the Legion isn't dead. Didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, her tone flat. You should forget what you think you know. Laughed harshly, bitter. Forget? How do you forget seeing a ghost? His voice cut in, sharp, final. Get out. Hesitated, eyes still burning into her, then stormed off into the night. His last words hung like smoke. The Legion isn't dead, not if she's here. The camp was quiet again, but's cover was shredded. His face was grim, his voice low. This is spiraling. If runs his mouth, command will come down on us. And when they do, they won't just ask questions. They'll drag you back into whatever hole they buried you in. Her eyes hardened. Then I'll do what I've always done. Adapt, survive. He studied her, torn between anger and something dangerously close to respect. Outside, whispers grew louder. Recruits spoke her name with awe. Officers spoke it with suspicion. And knew the fire they had survived was nothing compared to the storm that was now rising. Was no longer invisible. And there was no going back. Why did the camp hold its breath that morning? The sky over Camp Iron Vale was heavy with haze, refusing to clear even as dawn stretched across the hills. Recruits lined the parade ground, their posture than usual, their boots aligned, their eyes restless. Word had spread, and this time it wasn't rumor. An envoy was coming. Stepped from the barracks into the quiet tension, her uniform pressed clean, though faint smudges of ash still clung stubbornly at the cuffs. Every conversation died mid-sentence as she crossed the yard. Soldiers parted instinctively, not with jeers as they once had, but with silence weighted like stone. They no longer looked at her as invisible. They no longer dismissed her. They were waiting to see what she would do. Stood near the flagpole, his hands clasped behind his back, his face etched with fatigue. Shadows rimmed his eyes, he hadn't slept. When she reached him, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. They'll try to break you fast. Authority, intimidation, maybe worse. Whatever you say will decide what happens to you and to this camp. Met his gaze, her voice low but calm. And what if silence is the only thing that keeps me alive? Before he could answer, engines growled in the distance. A convoy appeared on the ridge. Dark vehicles rolled in formation, dust rising in their wake. The sound pressed against the camp like a storm. Soldiers shifted uneasily as the vehicles screeched to a halt at the gate. The lead car door opened. Colonel Sloane stepped out. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp, his insignia glinting even under the muted sky. His reputation preceded him, a man known not for mercy, but for unearthing what others wanted buried. His gaze swept the camp, cold and exact, before it landed on. He didn't bother with introductions. Bring her forward. 2 soldiers moved from his escort, but blocked them with a raised hand. She walks on her own. Sloane's eyes flicked to him, then back to her. A faint smile ghosted his lips. Very well, let's hear from the woman who saved your camp. Every step took across the yard echoed unnaturally loud, her boots striking gravel as if the earth itself amplified her presence. She stopped before Sloane. He studied her like a specimen, like a puzzle he already believed he could solve. You wear the face of a recruit, he said evenly. But reports say you commanded like a veteran, and then there is the matter of an emblem. His eyes narrowed. Lift your jacket. The parade ground froze. Soldiers stiffened, their breath caught. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, without a word, she unfastened the top button, pulling the fabric aside. The metal caught the light, a flash of forbidden steel. Gasps rippled through the ranks. Whispers rose, sharp as sparks. Sloane's expression hardened. Phantom Legion, he said. The words sliced the air like a blade. The name lives only in classified files, and even there it's redacted to nothing. That program was dismantled. No survivors. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a whisper meant to cut. And yet here you are. His heartbeat hammered against her ribs, but her voice came steady. I didn't come here to be found. I came to serve quietly, to vanish into the ranks. Impossible, Sloane said coldly. Men don't follow ghosts unless the ghost still breathes power. Yesterday they followed you. The recruits shifted, murmurs swelling. Stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't interrupt. Sloane tilted his head. You have 2 paths. Admit who you are and return with me, your history dragged into daylight. Or deny it and watch me dismantle this camp to uncover the truth myself. For a long moment, silence pressed on the parade ground, lifted her chin. You mistake me for a threat. I'm not here to resurrect the past. Every ghost is a threat, Sloane answered, especially one that still commands the living. The words hung sharp in the air. Then a voice broke from the crowd. She saved us. It was the boy she had pulled to his feet during the fire. His voice trembled, but his eyes were fierce. If she hadn't taken charge, half of us would have burned. You weren't here, we were. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. Sloane's gaze cut to the boy, then swept across the recruits. Faces stared back, raw, young, but steady. A ripple of agreement passed among them, subtle, unmistakable. Turned her head, meeting their eyes, and something shifted inside her chest, heavy, undeniable. She could no longer pretend to be invisible. Sloane's voice returned, low, sharp. So that's it. They already believe. Whether you like it or not, the Legion lives through you. Stepped forward, his tone like a whip. Enough. If command wants answers, you'll take them from me, not from someone who earned this camp's respect by saving lives. But Sloane only smiled faintly. Respect is fickle, fear is permanent, and fear will decide how this ends. His gaze locked on. Tonight, you will come with us. If you resist, I'll ensure this entire camp pays for your defiance." The recruits stiffened, outrage flickering across their faces. Lifted her hand slightly, a quiet gesture, a command without words. Her voice rang clear. "If going with you keeps them safe, I'll go." The words fell heavy across the yard. His head snapped toward her, disbelief flashing in his eyes, but she didn't look away. She held her ground, calm, unshaken. Sloane nodded once, a shadow of triumph on his face. "Wise." He gestured to his men. "Prepare transport." The engines rumbled to life, dust swirling as the convoy to depart. And the recruits, who had mocked her, who had doubted her, now stood frozen, watching her as if they were seeing something they had no name for. Not a ghost, not a recruit. Something else entirely. And as turned toward the waiting vehicles, his hand caught her arm. His grip was fierce, his voice low, burning. "This isn't over. You're not walking into their hands without a fight." She met his stare, her words quiet but steel. "Then be ready, because once they take me, the truth won't stay buried." The engines roared, the sun dipped lower. And the camp braced for a night that none of them had trained for. Why did the convoy return broken? The night had been long, the horizon lit by distant storms, the hum of generators casting restless shadows over Camp Iron Vale. Recruits had waited, their drills half-hearted, their whispers circling like hawks. But when the convoy rolled back through the gates at dawn, only half the vehicles returned. Dust caked their sides, one bearing fresh dents like it had struck something harder than road. And was it among them? Stood rigid at the gate as Colonel Sloane stepped down, his uniform still immaculate, though his eyes carried a sharp gleam. He ignored stare, speaking instead to the gathered recruits. "Your comrade is under investigation," Sloane said evenly. "She was never meant to be among you. The medal she wears ties her to a program that should have died years ago. The Phantom Legion is not to be spoken of. It is classified. It is gone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And if any of you think otherwise, understand this. Loyalty to ghosts will bury your careers before they begin." The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one spoke. Not yet. His voice cut through the silence. "And if the ghost is the only reason half this camp is still alive?" Sloane's eyes snapped to him, cold, sharp. "You tread dangerous ground, Major." Didn't flinch. He had stood in combat zones, watched men break under fire, and he had never once bent to threats spoken in polished tones. "She saved them," he said. "Not you, not command, her. And you think burying her again will keep the past quiet. You're wrong." Whispers stirred among the recruits. Sloane turned, scanning the rows of faces, but this time he saw something he hadn't expected, defiance. Small, flickering, but unmistakable. One voice rose, then another. "She's one of us. She saved our camp." The words carried, not loud at first, but spreading. The silence cracked, replaced by a low murmur of unity. Soldiers stood, their eyes no longer downcast. Sloane's jaw tightened. His control was slipping. He barked to his escort, "Break this up, disperse them." But stepped forward, his voice louder, heavier, cutting above the growing wave. "No one moves, you hear me? You followed her voice before, now you follow mine. We don't scatter, not again." The recruits froze. Then slowly they held their ground. The air thickened, the parade ground humming with tension. Turned back to Sloane, his words low but steady. "You can try to erase her, but you can't erase what she's done. They saw her lead. They saw her stand. And if you think fear is enough to break that, you don't know soldiers." Sloane's face darkened. His voice snapped like a whip. "You think you can defy command, Major. You think loyalty to one ghost outweighs your oath." Didn't answer right away. His silence was deliberate. He let the recruits feel it. Let them hear the weight of it. Finally, he spoke. "My oath was to protect the ones who stand beside me, and right now, that means her." The words landed like a strike. Sloane's composure cracked, just slightly, but enough. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Sloane's escorts moved uneasily, hands near their rifles. The recruits tightened their line, eyes sharp, jaws clenched. No shots fired, no orders shouted. Just the silence of a camp divided, one side holding fear, the other clinging to something stronger. Hope wasn't there to see it, but her presence filled the ground like smoke. The recruits didn't just remember her commands, they carried them. And knew, with a certainty that burned through his chest, that the fight wasn't about medals or erased programs or classified files. It was about dignity. Theirs, hers, the kind that doesn't need parades or speeches. The kind that survives because it refuses to die. And as the sun climbed higher, burning through the smoke-stained sky, realized something else. Sloan had miscalculated. Because the more he tried to bury her, the more the soldiers around her dug in. The Legion wasn't just a name in a file anymore. It was a spark. And sparks, once lit, didn't disappear. Why did the camp fall silent when they saw her again? The convoy returned 3 days later, its engines low, its paint streaked with dust. Soldiers abandoned their posts mid-task, boots clattering as they gathered at the edge of the yard. Whispers rushed through the ranks like wind in tall grass. Some expected her broken. Others feared she'd be gone forever. But when the doors swung open, stepped down on her own. Her uniform was torn at the collar, a faint bruise shadowed her jaw, but her stride never faltered. Shoulders squared, head high. Her eyes scanned the camp, taking in the faces, the whispers, the weight of expectation that now clung to her whether she wanted it or not. Colonel Sloan trailed behind, his expression tight, his posture rigid. He had dragged her into interrogation, into silence, into the shadow of classified files, but he hadn't broken her. And that failure burned across his face. The recruits didn't cheer. They didn't dare. Instead, they held their breath, their silence sharper than any salute. Broke the stillness first. He strode across the yard, boots striking like thunder, stopping just before her. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched hers, asking questions no one else could hear. Then he gave a single nod. It was enough. Sloane's voice lashed the silence. This farce ends now, is to be transported immediately. She does not belong here, she never did. He turned to the recruits, his tone rising, sharp and venomous. Stand down, return to your duties, forget her. But no one moved. Not one soldier. Instead, the line of recruits stiffened, their boots locking in place, their gazes fixed not on Sloan, but on her. Didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a speech. She only stood, letting the silence answer for her. And silence, in that moment, was louder than command. Stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying across the yard. You can't erase what she's done. You can't erase what they saw. She led when no one else did. She saved them when protocol failed. You call her a ghost, but to them. He gestured to the recruits, their eyes sharp, unblinking. To them, she's flesh and blood, and you don't get to take that away. Sloane's jaw clenched. His hand twitched toward his escort, but hesitation flickered in his eyes. He had authority, yes. He had power on paper, but power only lived if others believed in it. And right now, no one did. Not here, not in this yard. One recruit stepped forward, then another, and another, until half the line stood inches closer, their boots grinding into the dirt, their faces locked in quiet defiance. Sloane's voice cracked like a whip. Stand down. But they didn't. Because in their silence, they had already chosen. His gaze swept across them, her chest tightening with something she hadn't felt in years, not pride, not triumph. Something quieter, heavier, the fragile weight of being seen. She turned her head, her eyes finding Sloan. You can threaten me, you can bury files, but you can't unmake what happened here. They know who they are now. That's something you can't take back. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The recruit stood taller, his chin lifted. The camp itself seemed to breathe as one. Sloan stared at her, his composure fraying. He wanted to shout, to drag her back into silence, but the balance had shifted. His words, once sharp, now fell dull against the steel of their unity. He realized it too late. Without another word, he turned sharply, signaling his men. The convoy engines roared to life, the vehicles rolling out with heavy dust trailing behind. Colonel Sloane didn't look back. When the last vehicle disappeared over the ridge, the yard erupted in breath, not cheers, not celebration, just the release of something held too tightly for too long. Exhaled slowly. She didn't smile, she didn't bask. She simply stood there, ash still faint on her cuffs, the faint glint of her hidden metal catching the sun one last time before she tucked it back beneath her jacket. His voice broke the quiet. "What now?" Her answer was soft, almost fragile. "Now I serve, the way I should have been allowed to all along." He studied her face, then nodded. No more questions, not tonight. As the recruits dispersed, whispers lingered in the air. Not rumors anymore, not jeers, just quiet acknowledgement. She had come here to disappear, but instead she had been seen. Not as a ghost, not as a myth, but as herself. And in the end, maybe that was enough. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts,